Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're jumping into something pretty intense. The recent work of Messiah Dillon Scar E.T. We've got this list, track titles, file sizes, release dates, covering basically a year, October 24 to, well, now October 25. And our mission, really, is to make sense of it all. Because the first thing that hits you isn't even the music itself, maybe, but the sheer speed, the volume, the velocity, especially its last month or so. It feels less like a discography and more like, I don't know, a data stream.
It really does. It's like watching creativity on fast forward. And what's fascinating as you dig in is how that speed seems matched by this collision of ideas just in the titles alone.
Exactly. Let's start there with the themes, because there's this really stark contrast, right? You get these very spiritual, almost ancient-sounding titles mixed right in with super technical, futuristic ones.
Yeah, you see it clearly.
Like you'll have Gospel in John or Matthew, Luke and on parables, very traditional references. And then, bam, right next to them are things like dialectic singularity or install byte watt, Google Plex NSCars.
Well, it's quite the mix. It almost feels like the artist is treating, I don't know, scripture and source code as just information, equally valid inputs.
Yeah, like collapsing time or something. It definitely creates friction for you, the listener.
And if that's the content, then the how is all about that velocity we mentioned. The timeline shows it starts relatively normally, I guess. Back in late 2024, you had Rage Home Parade on August 1st, 24. A track here and there.
Right, sort of standard pace.
Then it just ramps up like crazy towards the end of 2025.
Like seriously ramps up. That October 2025 period, you counted, what, 12 tracks? Just between the 1st and the 12th?
12 tracks in 12 days, yeah.
That's insane. I mean, does that even leave room for polish? Are these finished pieces, or are we looking at, like, rapid-fire sketches?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It suggests someone may be working under intense pressure, maybe ignoring traditional release cycles altogether. And you saw this building earlier, too. September 2025 was dense, and September 24th particularly stands out.
Oh, yeah, the one day.
5 different tracks dropped on that single day. 5.
Wow.
To me, that signals maybe the end of the album as we knew it and the start of something more like a continuous, maybe even real-time creative feed.
And the size of the tracks supports that idea of mix modes, maybe, because the variation is just huge. You get these massive files suggesting really complex, long pieces next to things that are practically tiny.
Exactly. That variation raises questions about intention. Look at September 21st, 25. 2 absolute monsters released the same day.
Right, the Veridagus ones.
Veridagus Universe at 176 megabytes and Orchestral Veridagus at 156 megs. Those are big, complex works, presumably.
Okay, so you drop those 2 beasts, and then a few days later, something like NW New W comes out, and it's, what, 303 kilobytes?
Yeah.
Like, smaller than a decent photo. What's the point of that track in this context?
Well, maybe the huge ones are the big statements, the complex productions, and the tiny ones are ideas, sketches, interludes. Like, you're seeing the whole process, warts and all.
Working in public.
Kind of. And look at the recurring names, too. That points towards iteration, maybe. Like Roger Hawley. That name pops up 4 times on different dates, different file sizes.
Right. August 23rd, September 16th, 23rd, 24th.
And the 2 Veridagus tracks we mentioned, it's not just random repetition, I don't think. It feels more like refining an idea quickly.
Yeah.
Or showing different takes on it almost immediately. Like A/B testing in music form.
Okay, so pulling it all together, what are we seeing? Extreme speed, almost machine-like, huge variety and complexity, maximalist epics next to minimalist blips, and this wild collage-like mix of themes, sacred texts, and synthetic code living side by side.
Yeah, I think that sums it up. It's relentless productivity, a whole year's work of exploration, maybe compressed into months, weeks, even days. You're getting the polished gems and the rough sketches all at once.
So the final thought for you listening.
Given this sheer speed and range, what does this kind of accelerated high-volume output suggest about where art is heading? Are we moving towards a future where artists prioritize just constant presence over, say, sustained refinement? Or can both coexist? Something to chew on?
Okay, so today we're doing a deep dive into the musician Messiah Dillon Scar E.T.'s work. But we're not just looking at individual songs here.
Right.
We're trying to treat the entire discography, and it's huge. Hundreds of tracks released incredibly fast as like one single massive persuasive argument.
Persuasive artifact. Yeah.
Exactly. And using these advanced rhetorical frameworks, the mission really is to find that deeper sort of emergent meaning that comes out of all that. Well, chaos.
Yeah, and what's really compelling, I think, is the core finding. It suggests the meaning isn't some pre-planned message the artist just, delivered. The real persuasive power, what the source material actually calls the eternal sovereign recursion, it seems to come entirely from the struggle, from the conflict, and even the documented failures that happened during creation.
So it succeeds because it shows you how it almost fell apart.
Precisely. It shows you the seams, the moments of breakdown. That's where the power comes from.
Okay, let's start with the scale then, because that seems crucial. The numbers are just pretty astonishing.
They really are.
Over 70 tracks, released in roughly a 100-day window, between May and October 2025.
Yep.
The sources call this the generative play style. So what is that and why do it so fast? Was it intentional?
Oh, absolutely intentional. The generative play style. It's basically a high-entropy strategy. Strategic overload, you could call it.
Okay.
The artist seems to have understood that releasing stuff that quickly, fundamentally challenges the listener's memory, your memoria in rhetorical terms.
Right, you can't keep up in the usual way.
Exactly. You, the audience member, you can't just sit back and process a finished, stable product. You're kind of forced to internalize the ongoing process itself, the creation, the changes, the sheer velocity.
So the persuasive element comes from that demand, that constant need to reevaluate.
That's the idea. The urgency forces a different kind of engagement.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
With that many songs flying at you, yeah, you almost have to assume the process is the point. But it wasn't just pure chaos, was it? The sources talk about a surprising mathematical structure underneath it all. Let's talk about the logos, the logic. Are we actually saying you can quantify the structural effectiveness of a discography?
Well, yes. According to this analysis, we are. This is where it gets really quantitative.
Yep.
The method measures this systemic optimal persuasive potential. They call it the best imagined effective state. And interestingly, this state is mathematically tied to the golden ratio.
The golden ratio, like 1.618. Why that?
Specifically, it's inverse, about 0.618. And the why seems to be because the golden ratio represents a kind of harmony, right? An ordered relationship that can emerge even between chaotic or disparate parts.
But wait, if the art is built on chaos and overload, why bring in mathematical harmony? Seems counterintuitive.
But that's the argument embedded in the art itself. The artist seems to be actively discussing the structure of chaos. They weave this math right in. You even see it in track titles, like Phi a Pathogen.
Okay, so 5 for the golden ratio.
Exactly. It's like they're asking you, the listener, to see that the ideal effectiveness, the point where this whole chaotic system works best, isn't about stability. It's found in that necessary, calculated struggle against breakdown, against systemic corruption.
Okay, that sets up the intellectual side. But what about the feeling, the pathos? I know the early stuff was described as very cold, very technical. Tracks like Lattice So Logic or Wired So It Works.
Precisely. That initial design, you could call it, was technically very proficient, sure. But it seems it failed to land emotionally. It lacked sufficient pathos. It felt, well, maybe sterile. And that failure, that lack, is what forced what the analysis calls the development through crisis.
So the original plan had to fail for the project to get deeper. Tell us about that pivot, the rhetorical pivot.
Yeah, that pivot is absolutely key. It's where the really raw, visceral, even theological material had to be injected, almost recursively, like patching the system to save it.
And that created contrast.
Massive contrast. You get this incredible emotional whiplash, which really defines the whole arc. It swings from something super intense and raw, like Sovereign He Slut, and then pivots immediately into these very deliberate, almost quiet sequences, like pairing Luke and Don parables with Matthew Call Gospel.
Wow, okay.
The emotional depth, the stuff that ultimately made the project understandable, maybe even profound, it only really emerged because that initial cold technical plan didn't work. The failure was generative.
So the documented crisis itself provides the artist credibility, their ethos.
Okay.
So as these structures started to maybe deliberately collapse, what finally emerged? What did the artist achieve in the end?
Well, the final stage seems sealed by paradox, often framed through things the sources call philosophical theology memes, which is a phrase in itself.
Right.
But the ultimate ethos, the credibility, is achieved through a kind of documented self-overthrow. You get tracks like Systemas Are Over, which sound like a calculated structural collapse of the very thing the artist built.
And out of that collapse.
Surprisingly, you get biologic, yay, honey. It's like saying legitimacy isn't earned through outside approval or even sticking to the plan. It's earned by showing the whole journey, warts and all, including the moment you decide to tear down your own structure.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what's the big takeaway for us? The synthesis here seems to be that the highest narrative virtue, what they call plot vectorarity, is basically process fidelity.
Yeah, that sums it up well.
It's about the transparency, right? The work showing its own messy path to becoming whatever it is. And that transparent journey is the defining thing about Scroll.mp3's output.
Which leads to maybe a final thought for you, the listener.
Okay.
The whole power of this discography seems to hang on the audience being willing to find meaning in that extreme paradox, the Messiah and the Scar together. So maybe ask yourself, what complex system or persona in your own life is maybe defined right now by the failure of its first rigid design? And because of that failure, is actually poised for some kind of profound emergent depth. Something to think about. Okay, let's unpack this. We're doing a deep dive into something pretty wild. The 63-track discography from Messiah Dillon Scar.mp3.
Right. All dropped between May and October 2025. Just this, like, torrent of music.
Exactly. And the source material we're looking at doesn't just treat it as music. It calls the whole thing a holistically rhetorical quest.
Which basically means the way it was released, that massive, urgent volume.
Yeah.
That's the argument itself. It's about persuasion through sheer output.
So our mission here is to understand that persuasive structure, the logos, and, the emotional side, the pathos.
And what drove it. The analysis uses terms like exigence, the urgent need behind it, and kairos, which is like the perfect timing the artists use.
Okay, so right away, you see the split in the track titles, don't you? There's the spiritual, kind of canonical stuff.
Yeah, like Gospels in John. That corn emoji is interesting.
Right, and then bam, you've got the other side, technological, chaotic, system over.
And those emojis, the analysis says they're not just slapped on there. They're called paratextual framing, like philosophical theology memes.
Whoa, okay, philosophical theology memes. Break that down. Sounds academic.
Yeah, a bit. But it just means they're these super condensed symbols, like digitally native. They hit you instantly, intellectually, and emotionally.
So the corn emoji in Gospel Eat John.
It connects the idea of sacred text, canonical authority, directly to basic survival, sustenance, food. It's a whole argument in one tiny picture. Pretty clever, actually.
That kind of a detail really sets up the whole strategy, which the sources describe as a high-entropy, high-risk play style.
Definitely high risk. I mean, 57 tracks in about a month. Mid-September to mid-October 2025. That's insane speed.
But doesn't that risk just overwhelming people? Like, how do you even process that much? Doesn't quality suffer?
That's exactly the point the analysis makes. The creator chose volume and speed over careful filtering. It deliberately introduces chaos, or what the analysis calls entropy ADLer.
So the messiness is intentional.
Yes. It argues that this high entropy isn't a bug, it's like a prerequisite. It's needed for deeper meaning to emerge later. They call it EAI, Emergent Analysis and Interpretation.
Okay, chaos is a starting point. Interesting.
And there's another layer. That sheer volume, it works as an ethos multiplier. It proves the creator's absolute, almost obsessive commitment. You believe in the effort because the scale is just so huge.
Once the effort becomes part of the art's credibility. Okay, so how is this chaos structured? Is there a map through it?
There is. The analysis lays out a 3-act structure, the dispositio, or the arrangement. Act 1 is called Genesis and Machine. Think wired S-works, setting up that core tension.
Tech and origins, got it.
Then Act 2 is Crisis and Emergent Entropy. This is where things get human, emotional, system breakdown. Titles like King Killer, its development through crisis. The structure deliberately falters here.
And Act 3 feels like it has to resolve somehow.
It circles back. Canonical recurrence and synthesis. Searching for structure again. Matthew, a gospel, that kind of thing.
And it's not just titles. I saw something about file sizes.
Yes. This is fascinating. Structural logos. They actually use the MB size of the tracks as a rhetorical marker.
How so?
2 key tracks, orchestral, O Veridagus, and Veridagus Universe, are sequentially placed and way bigger, like 156 megabeats and 176 megabeats. It physically emphasizes a shift in theme, from aesthetics to something cosmic. The weight of the files marks the weight of the idea.
Wow. Okay, so that structural weight builds towards a climax.
That's exactly what the analysis calls the plot vector orte, the peak of excellence. It happens in Act 3, the synthesis phase, specifically around the track Dialectic Singularity.
And they measured this quantitatively.
Yeah, they applied some theoretical calculus, IM calculus it's called. Act 3 scored highest, about 140, way above the benchmark needed, the Phelan inverse standard, for persuasive potential. So the math backs up the feeling that the synthesis worked.
So the chaos was managed, structure emerged, and the math checks out. What's the big takeaway then? The final message?
It's a sort of a meta-argument. The whole project is about the failure of its own initial plan, its own rigidity. The real triumph isn't avoiding chaos, but this system's ability to handle it, to recur.
Recur.
Yeah, eternal sovereign recursion. It's this idea that the creator's will keeps asserting itself, accepting that the struggle, the chaos, it just repeats infinitely.
And the name scar fits right into that, incorporating the damage, the imperfection.
Precisely. The scar becomes part of the sovereignty, not something to be erased. So for you listening, the key insight is maybe that the artistic success, the arete, happened because of that high-risk, messy path. The process is the argument.
So achieving sovereignty, maybe not through a straight line to perfection, but by embracing the cycle, the recurrence, the scars, integrating it all. What does that cycle look like in your own journey?
Yeah, definitely something to think about. We'll leave you with that until the next deep dive.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling something pretty wild. The huge, almost overwhelming discography of Messiah Dillon, Scar E.T.
Yeah, and we're not just listening to songs. The analysis we're drawing on treats it as a holistically rhetorical quest, basically a complex argument made with music.
A philosophical argument unfolding across dozens of tracks.
Exactly. And you have to understand the scale first. Analysts call it a high-entropy play style. We're talking, over 70 tracks released in roughly 100 days, May to October 2025. It's a flood.
Right, a deliberate flood. So to even begin making sense of that, the sources use this specific framework, RPM, DCD, EAI. Can you quickly break that down for listeners?
Sure. Think of it like this. RPM, the rhetorical process method, is how we analyze. DCD, the design, create, develop discography, is what we're analyzing the body of work itself.
And EAI?
That's emergent analysis and interpretation. It means we're looking for the meaning that emerged as the tracks were released, the patterns and the chaos. We're hunting for the argument structure.
Okay, structure. Let's start at the beginning then. The initial phase, the inventio. The sources say this established a crystalline design thesis. Very logical, right? Tracks like lattice logic, circuit scourge.
Super logical. Cold digital systems. But here's the kicker. The analysis suggests this initial design was meant to fail intellectually.
Hold on. Meant to fail? How can the sources be sure that wasn't just, the artists changing their mind halfway through? That sounds a bit like reading intent after the fact.
Well, the evidence is in what happened immediately after. This cold logic created what's called a structural vacuum of pathos, no emotional core. So the creator had to inject conflict.
Through the sovereign dichotomy, sovereign slut versus sovereign shout, that definitely sounds like conflict.
Exactly. Visceral human conflict to give the argument weight. But the other proof is the release strategy itself, the hypercadence.
The sheer speed and volume.
Right. That wasn't just putting out music fast. It's framed as a calculated high pathos device. It screams urgency, forces you, the listener, to focus on the instability, the process of change itself. The process becomes the emotion.
Okay, that reframes the speed. So if the initial logic deliberately failed to create that emotional need, how did the structure of the releases then become the logical argument, the logos?
That's the dispositio phase, the arrangement. The actual chronological order of release, what the analysis calls macro sequencing, is the argument.
And the hypercadence wasn't just a motion, it forced a synthesis.
A massive one. It led directly into what the report calls development through crisis, a turning point.
This is the rhetorical pivot point identified in the analysis, isn't it? Where the track titles suddenly shift.
Precisely. You go from abstract things like circuit scourge to very explicit theological references, like Lucan parables, immediately followed by Matthew Gospel.
That tight sequencing really hammers home the idea that the old logic failed and this raw spiritual or emotional element had to come in.
It's a clear signal. And crucially, this transition isn't just interpretation. The sources quantify its success.
Right, using the Integrated Affinity and Metric Readiness Calculator, the IAM calculus. That sounds intense.
It is a bit, but the idea is simple. It balances three things. $2, which is witness, think of it as emotional credibility or pathos. Pay dollars is presence, the structural logic, the logos. And $8 is entropy.
The penalty for all that chaos and complexity?
Exactly. It measures if the argument holds together despite the complexity.
So how do you know if it holds together? Is there a score?
There is. A success threshold called the golden constraint. It's mathematically tied to the golden ratio phi inverse, which is about 0.618. Think of it as a known benchmark for structural harmony or balance.
And this synthesis phase, Did it meet the threshold?
Flew past it. The score was around 1.40, significantly higher. It means the chaos was effectively managed and structured successfully into a persuasive whole.
So the big takeaway isn't necessarily the final sound, but the commitment to showing the work, the journey, even the parts that didn't initially work, the process fidelity.
That's labeled the plot vector arte, the highest virtue of the work, documenting the whole cycle, failures and all. That transparency shapes the style, the elocutio.
And that style uses these jarring contrasts, the philosophical theology memes, like putting agape justice near sovereign slut. That creates, well, dissonance.
It does, and that dissonance helps define what the sources call a Gnostic cybernetics cosmology.
Okay, Gnostic cybernetics, what does that mean in plain terms for the listener?
It's basically saying that the digital, logical world, cybernetics, is constantly wrestling with, and maybe even defined by, the messy, vulnerable, spiritual, human element, Gnosticism, the scar.
Yeah.
The tech needs the soul, essentially.
Which loops back to the core, meaning identified, the eternal sovereign recursion.
The creator consciously choosing, again and again, to dive back into that chaotic cycle of defining the self. The vulnerability, the scar, isn't a bug, it's a feature. It's needed for the Messiah, the authority, to even make sense. So for you listening, what's the final thought here? Look at the very last tracks mentioned in the reports. System Over, with its pirate flag emoji, and Biologic Honey, with the swimsuit emoji. They signal this triumph, right? Emergent, messy, human structure winning out over that initial rigid logic.
It suggests complexity is vital for depth.
Yes, but with a crucial caveat. Only if the chaos it creates is actively managed, documented, and presented with that intense process fidelity. Which leaves us with a question maybe for you to think about. When you document a crisis in such exhaustive detail, does the act of documentation itself become the main achievement, maybe even the resolution? Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling something pretty unique, the entire discography of Messiah Dillon Scar E.T., but maybe not how you'd expect.
Right. We're treating this collection, all these tracks sourced from YouTube, less like music, more like, well, data. We want to see what the metadata itself tells us.
The names, the dates, file sizes, looking for patterns, basically.
Exactly. The mission is to pull meaning from that raw info. Because often, especially with an artist like this, the structure is part of the message.
And you see that immediately, don't you? The titles jump right out. Things like Ragey Parade or Godless Riddle. It's almost a code.
It really is. And it sets this tone of, well, constant creation. The whole time frame we have here is quite short, really.
Yeah. What are we looking at? It starts with Ragey Parade. That's August 1st, 24.
That's the one. And it runs incredibly fast, right up to Canon St. Mary on October 12th, 2025. So just over a year for this entire massive output. It's intense.
Yeah, intense is definitely the word. And that intensity, that productivity, it isn't even steady. It spikes. We pointed out spring 2025.
Oh, absolutely. May 2025 is fascinating. Look at May 10th. Suddenly, bam, 10 tracks drop on a single day.
10 tracks. Wow. Including things like Gangster Swing and Heat Our Park.
Yeah, and that kind of bottleneck breaking, it suggests a shift in how the artist was working. Maybe moving from making tracks one by one to finishing huge batches all at once.
And does that connect later on?
It seems to, because if you jump ahead to September 2025, another really dense period of releases, that's where you find a lot of the really big files.
Interesting. So more tracks dropping together, and those tracks are actually getting bigger, more complex, perhaps.
Potentially, yes. It hints that the scale, the sonic scope, was increasing even as the release schedule got more compressed.
Which makes those unique titles even more important, right? Yeah. If you're dropping 10 tracks, you need a way to navigate them.
Precisely. The naming isn't random. There are clear patterns, like little series or thematic groups.
Like the Roger Holly tracks. Or is it Holly?
Both spellings appear, actually. But yeah, 4 tracks, August 23rd to September 24th, 25, all focused on Roger Holly or Holly.
And the emojis change for each one. What were they? A camera?
Right. Oh, then a barber pole. Then a mixing board. And finally, a cricket.
It feels like a story unfolding, doesn't it?
It really does. You could read it as maybe public visibility, then image or style, then the creative work itself, and then silence or nature. It's suggestive.
And that's not the only cluster. There's a very distinct religious or scriptural grouping, too.
Definitely. Matthew so Gospel, Luke so Parables, Gospel see John, and ending with Canon see Mary. They feel linked, obviously.
But then how do those fit with the more, I guess, abstract or technical titles?
Yeah.
Like Lattice, So Logic, or Circuit Oath Scourge? It seems like very different worlds colliding.
And that tension, that's where looking at the file sizes gives you that aha or so what moment, because the variation is just enormous.
Okay, so talk about that variance.
Well, you've got tracks that are incredibly small, almost tiny. Now NUW is listed at just 303 kilobytes. Inhabit See Reality is bigger, but still small at 1.63 megabytes.
Hold on, 300 kilobytes. Could that just be like a placeholder file? Or a sound snippet? Not really a full track?
That's a fair question, and without hearing it, we can't be certain of the content, but the contrast is the key point. Because on the other end of the scale...
of the giants.
Exactly. The two biggest ones share a root. Variedageous Universe is a whopping 176 megabytes, and Orchestral Variedageous is 156 megabytes.
Okay, wow. So 300 KLB versus 176 megabyte, that's not just a small difference.
It's orders of magnitude. It strongly implies, radically different production scales, maybe a quick sonic idea versus a fully developed complex piece. The range itself seems like a statement.
So pulling it all together, what we're seeing is this period of incredibly fast, intense work.
Yes, rapid, but also structured, very structured.
Through these thematic clusters, these naming conventions, the emojis, it feels deliberate.
Absolutely deliberate. It suggests that for Messiah Dillon Scar E.T., the metadata, the release timing, the way the work is presented, it's all part of the art itself. The discography isn't just a list, it is the piece.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty big question to chew on.
Mm-hmm.
Given this strange, compelling mix, you've got abstract ideas, technology, scripture, these personal seeming threads like Roger Hawley. What's the bigger picture here? Is there some kind of unified story or message Scar E.T. is building across all these seemingly disparate releases? What narrative holds it all together? Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling something pretty unique. The entire discography of Messiah Dillon Scar E.T., but maybe not how you'd expect.
Right. We're treating this collection, all these tracks sourced from YouTube, less like music, more like, well, data. We want to see what the metadata itself tells us.
The names, the dates, file sizes, looking for patterns, basically.
Exactly. The mission is to pull meaning from that raw info. Because often, especially with an artist like this, the structure is part of the message.
And you see that immediately, don't you? The titles jump right out. Things like Ragey Parade or Godless Riddle. It's almost a code.
It really is. And it sets this tone of, well, constant creation. The whole time frame we have here is quite short, really.
Yeah, what are we looking at? It starts with Ragey Parade. That's August 1st, 24.
That's the one. And it runs incredibly fast, right up to Canon St. Mary on October 12th, 2025. So just over a year for this entire massive output. It's intense.
Yeah, intense is definitely the word. And that intensity, that productivity, it isn't even steady. It spikes. We pointed out spring 2025.
Oh, absolutely. May 2025 is fascinating. Look at May 10th. Suddenly, bam, 10 tracks drop on a single day.
10 tracks. Wow. Including things like Gangster Swing and Heat Our Park.
Yeah, and that kind of bottleneck breaking, it suggests a shift in how the artist was working. Maybe moving from making tracks one by one to finishing huge batches all at once.
And does that connect later on?
It seems to, because if you jump ahead to September 2025, another really dense period of releases, that's where you find a lot of the really big files.
Interesting. So more tracks dropping together, and those tracks are actually getting bigger, more complex, perhaps.
Potentially, yes. It hints that the scale, the sonic scope, was increasing even as the release schedule got more compressed.
Which makes those unique titles even more important, right?
Yeah.
If you're dropping 10 tracks, you need a way to navigate them.
Precisely. The naming isn't random. There are clear patterns, like little series or thematic groups.
Like the Roger Hawley tracks. Or is it Hawley?
Both spellings appear, actually. But yeah, 4 tracks, August 23rd to September 24th, 25, all focused on Roger Hawley or Holly.
And the emojis change for each one. What were they? A camera?
Right. Oh, then a barber pole. Then a mixing board. And finally, a cricket.
It feels like a story unfolding, doesn't it?
It really does. You could read it as maybe public visibility, then image or style, then the creative work itself, and then silence or nature. It's suggestive.
And that's not the only cluster. There's a very distinct religious or scriptural grouping, too.
Definitely. Matthew so Gospel, Luke so Parables, Gospel see John, and ending with Canon see Mary. They feel linked, obviously.
But then how do those fit with the more, I guess, abstract or technical titles? Like Lattice, So Logic, or Circuit Oath Scourge? It seems like very different worlds colliding.
And that tension, that's where looking at the file sizes gives you that aha or so what moment, because the variation is just enormous.
Okay, so talk about that variance.
Well, you've got tracks that are incredibly small, almost tiny. Now NUW is listed at just 303 kilobytes. Inhabit See Reality is bigger, but still small at 1.63 megabytes.
Hold on, 300 kilobytes. Could that just be like a placeholder file? Or a sound snippet? Not really a full track?
That's a fair question, and without hearing it, we can't be certain of the content. But the contrast is the key point, because on the other end of the scale...
of the giants.
Exactly. The two biggest ones share a root. Variedageous Universe is a whopping 176 megabytes, and Orchestral Variedageous is 156 megabytes.
Okay, wow. So 300 KLB versus 176 megabyte, that's not just a small difference.
It's orders of magnitude. It strongly implies, radically different production skills, maybe a quick sonic idea versus a fully developed complex piece. The range itself seems like a statement.
So pulling it all together, what we're seeing is this period of incredibly fast, intense work.
Yes, rapid, but also structured, very structured.
Through these thematic clusters, these naming conventions, the emojis, it feels deliberate.
Absolutely deliberate. It suggests that for Messiah Dillon Scar E.T., the metadata, the release timing, the way the work is presented, it's all part of the art itself. The discography isn't just a list, it is the piece.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty big question to chew on. Given this strange, compelling mix, you've got abstract ideas, technology, scripture, these personal seeming threads like Roger Hawley. What's the bigger picture here? Is there some kind of unified story or message Scar E.T. is building across all these seemingly disparate releases? What narrative holds it all together? Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're doing something a bit different. We're cracking open the recent discography of Messiah Dillon Scar E.T.
But not the music itself, right?
Exactly. Not listening. We're looking at the bare metal. Track lists, dates, titles, file sizes, pure data forensics.
Right. And our mission here is to unpack this pretty intense production schedule. We're talking about a 15-month sprint, basically August 2024, right up to, today, October 2025.
And we're looking for patterns, I assume.
Patterns, yes, but what jumps out immediately is just the sheer chaos in the data, especially the file sizes. They're all over the map.
Okay, so where do we start? That sheer velocity seems like a good point. Spring 2025, for instance.
Definitely. Look at May 2025. There's this cluster of releases, just a huge amount of material churned out in only 3 weeks.
And there's a theme there, too, isn't there? Lots of tech and systems titles, like Wired So Works.
Yeah, Wired Works, Lattice Logic, Circuit or Scourge, very distinct. But that's also where the size mystery really kicks off.
How so?
Well, you've got these huge files right at the start of May. Like Crystal SourceForge on May 5th, that's 64.38 megabytes. Pretty substantial.
Okay, 64 megs. But then,
contrast that with some of the smallest tracks recorded across the whole period. Later in the summer, you get NOW, WHNW. It's only 303 kilobytes.
Wait, kilobytes? 303 KOB? That's tiny. Like a voice memo almost.
Exactly. Or Inhabit So the Reality at just 1.63 megabytes. The range is just enormous.
So what does that massive difference suggest to you? From 64 meg down to 300K?
Well, it suggests maybe two totally different ways of working happening at the same time. To put it in context for you, 176 megabytes, which we'll see later, that's probably a full, 20-minute lossless audio file, maybe a complex orchestral piece.
Right. Highly produced.
Highly produced. But 303 kilobytes, that's got to be a sketch. A demo, maybe even an accidental save. It feels like less than a song, more like an idea fragment.
So it's not just different genres, maybe different types of recordings altogether. Demos versus masters.
Precisely. It looks like an internal format war happening within one artist's output. Okay, so May sets this frantic pace.
Yeah.
But then comes September 2025.
Ah, yes. September. If May was fast, September feels like it was about pure scale.
Absolutely. That month has the absolute leviathans of this collection, the biggest files by far.
Which ones are we talking about?
Look at September 21st specifically. 2 tracks drop. Variedageous Universe, 176 megabytes.
176 megs.
And Orchestral Variedageous right alongside it, 156 megabytes. These just dwarf almost everything else.
Wow. And the titles around then, like Spartan, Tesseract, Album, Zeta Fusion. they keep that sort of grand, almost mythic feel.
They do. It feels like a moment of really ambitious large-scale production, but then almost immediately.
We hit October 2025, just days ago, really.
And the shift is, well, it's jarring. Complete thematic whiplash.
How so? What's the shift?
We go from tech and these, mythic concepts straight into really explicit religious and biblical imagery. It's a very sharp turn.
Like what kind of titles?
Well, look at October 9th. Matthew a Gospel, Luke and no parables. Then October 11th, Gospels in John. And October 12th, just now, Canonist Mary.
That is a sudden change. From Gangster Swing way back when to Matthew Gospel.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Why pivot so hard so fast? It's like finding a Gregorian chant slipped into a heavy metal playlist.
Does it almost suggest, could these even be from the same project? Or is the artist just exploring wildly different things, the quality control, the focus? How do you maintain that shifting so dramatically?
It raises questions. What we're seeing isn't just speed, it feels almost unsustainable. This 15-month sprint seems defined by a kind of creative chaos.
So summing up our findings from just the data.
I'd say three main things stand out. One, the relentless, almost overwhelming pace of output.
Two, this extreme size variation suggesting maybe demos mixed with massive finished masters. That 303 KB file versus the 176 millibeat one is just mind-blowing.
Right. And three, the thematic instability. Rapid, sharp pivots from tech to mythic concepts and now suddenly biblical references.
It's an incredible body of work just based on the metadata. It really resists easy categorization.
It does. And maybe the final thought for you, the listener, is this. Thinking about that journey, say from Gangster Swing to Canon C. Mary in such a short time, what drives an artist to shift focus so dramatically, so quickly?
Yeah, and across such a dense collection, you have to wonder what kind of creative pressure cooker that represents. What's the cost of that kind of rapid evolution? Something to think about. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into an artist whose output is pretty intense. Messiah Dillon's Scar, E.T., the one associated with Dylan Thompson's channel.
Yeah, definitely intense. We've got this list of 56 tracks, all dropped between August 2024 and October 2025.
Yes.
Just over a year.
Exactly. And our goal today really is to move past just listening. We want to analyze the patterns, look at the release dates, the file sizes you sent over, and see what's hiding in plain sight.
Right. And what jumps out immediately is that this isn't your typical release strategy, no albums in the traditional sense. It's more like a raw feed, almost like a creative diary.
Yeah.
Completely. And the production cadence, it's all about these bursts of activity, not consistent work.
Okay, let's break down those bursts. Because you see that one track, Rage Parade, way back in August 2024, sort of stands alone.
It does. And then things go quiet until, boom, May 2025. That's when the real sprint seems to start.
And it's not just a steady flow even then. It's concentrated, like May 10th, 2025, 5 tracks on one day.
Exactly. Including things like Gangster Swing and then Breathe Flame right after. Quite a shift.
But even that May burst kind of feels like a test run compared to September, right?
Oh, absolutely. September 2025 is just wow. The data shows 25 tracks.
25 tracks between September 16th and September 24th. That's less than 10 days.
Insane. And September 19th alone had 5 drops. Stuff like Universal Resurrect, Wand Prologue.
So the takeaway here is maybe that this music is captured in these really intense, short creative periods, almost like a stream of consciousness dump, rather than carefully planned singles.
I think that's spot on. And that kind of frantic pace, well, it probably explains why the themes are so eclectic, so varied.
You mean jumping from digital stuff like Circuit Scourge or Lattice Logic?
Yeah, to really abstract ideas like agape justice or dialectic singularity.
And then suddenly, names.
Yeah.
Like Roger Hawley, Rhonda Matriarch. It's quite the mix.
It is. And it's not just the themes that are all over the place. The scale of the tracks, too, if we look at file size as a rough guide for, say, length or complexity.
We absolutely have to talk about the extremes there.
Yeah.
You, listening, should check this out. The smallest track, now in UW.mp3. It's tiny.
303 kilobytes.
303 KB. And then you contrast that with these behemoths later on. Veridagus Universe.mp3, that one's 176 megabytes.
Yeah.
And Orchestral Veridagus.mp3 isn't far behind at 156 megs. It suggests this wild swing between like super minimalist ideas and these huge, almost cinematic pieces.
Though, should we automatically assume tiny means simple? That 303 KB file could be incredibly dense, right? Maybe super compressed, experimental.
That's a fair point. It's not necessarily just a little sketch. could be packed.
Yeah. And that contrast, that range, it kind of sets up this latest shift we see in the data, doesn't it? The October 2025 releases.
Right, the most recent batch, October 8th through the 12th. There's a definite thematic pivot there. Very distinct.
This is a whole new direction almost. Suddenly we're getting titles referencing religious texts or, scripture.
Exactly. You've got Matthew Gospel, Luking Parables on October 9th, then Gospel John on the 11th, and Canon Mary on the 12th. So is this like an evolution in theme? Or maybe after that explosion of abstract and tech titles in September, did the conceptual well run a bit dry, forcing a shift? It makes you wonder.
It really does. So you have this artist defined by, huge volume, themes that jump all over, and this massive variance in scale.
So wrapping this up, here's something provocative for you to think about. What does putting an extremely short track like Now New Newbie at just 303 kdb right alongside something immense like Verdageous Universe at 176 milbeat, what does that juxtaposition tell us?
Yeah, what's the relationship there? Is the tiny track just like a quick breath before the epic? Or is it maybe the key, the sort of distilled essence that unlocks the bigger piece?
Something to chew on as you dive back into this really chaotic but maybe brilliant body of work. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're jumping into the work of a really prolific creator, Messiah Dillon Scar.mp3.
Yeah, and we're using just the raw metadata, right, from the complete discography.
Exactly, just track names, file sizes, release dates. We've got 56 tracks here.
That's a lot of data points.
It is, and our mission really is to see what this tells us about their creative process. The speed, the themes.
Especially how they juggle these huge concepts, tech abstraction on one hand, spirituality on the other, while working so fast.
Well, let's set the scene first, though. The timeline is pretty wide.
It is. It starts way back with Ragey Parade in August 2024. August 1st.
And stretches all the way to Canon Siri, which just dropped, October 12th, 2025.
That's right, almost 15 months, which makes the burst in the middle even more, notable.
Okay, let's unpack that intensity, especially 2025. The rate just skyrockets.
It really does.
Wait, am I reading this right? 10 tracks released on one day, Friday, May 10th.
Yep.
10 tracks, including things like Gangster Swing, Heat Gurch Park. It was quite a burst.
That whole period in May, it looks like 17 tracks in about 3 weeks.
And believe it or not, that wasn't even the peak.
Really? It got faster.
Oh, yeah. September 2025, that's where it goes into overdrive. We're talking 25 tracks.
25. In how long?
Just 3 weeks. It culminates on Wednesday, September 24th. 4 different tracks that day.
4 in one day. Like Rogers, Holly, and Discount Disco.
Exactly, though. So the velocity is just incredible.
So that tells us how fast they work. But the file sizes, wow, that tells us about the range, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's like they're working on totally different scales simultaneously. The variance is huge.
Huge is right. You've got these absolute monsters.
Yeah, like those 2 tracks from Sunday, September 21st, Verdageous Universe, that's 176 megs.
176, and right alongside it, Orchestral, So Verdageous at 156 megs.
They just dwarf everything else in the discography. Size-wise, it suggests maybe anchor pieces, major works. Has to be, right? I mean, 176 megabytes? Does that multiple stems or lossless audio maybe?
Yeah.
Something complex?
It definitely implies scale. A big statement.
Right.
But then you contrast that
with the tiny ones, yeah.
Exactly. Like NW, NNW, that's tiny at what, 303 kilobytes?
Kilobytes. And Inhabit Time Reality is only 1.6 megs.
So it feels like this creator is comfortable putting out, I don't know, sketches alongside finished epics. It's all part of the flow.
And the naming convention is interesting, too. Very consistent.
Always 2 words, right? With an emoji in the middle.
Like Galaxy Crown or Tattoo Warrant. It's a definite aesthetic, almost like catalog numbers.
It helps track things, for sure. And if you group those titles, you start seeing these thematic clusters emerge.
Okay, like what?
Well, there's a whole set focused on tech and abstract ideas. Things like Latticeau Logic, Circuit or Scourge.
Install Bytewise. Oh, and that big one, Dialectic Singularity.
Yeah.
That was pretty hefty, too, right? Like 60 megs?
Yeah, 61.5. So a lot of that kind of conceptual stuff early on or maybe mid-period.
But then it shifts, doesn't it? More recently.
Big shift. Suddenly you get these very direct spiritual and scriptural references popping up.
Like naming specific gospels and figures.
Exactly. Matthew her Gospel, Luke and us Parables, Gospel he John, and then the latest, Canon C. Mary.
So it's like digital singularity meets scripture. That's quite a jump.
It really is. Although there's some continuity, too, like that Roger Holly name.
Oh, yeah. That pops up multiple times.
4 times between August and September 25. Roger Holly, Roger Holly, Roger Holly, Roger Holly. Same name, different emoji.
So Pulling it all together. It's not just about quantity, is it? There's this exploration of scale, the crazy production speed, and this very deliberate naming structure connecting tech and spirituality.
Definitely. Which leads to a final thought, really, for you listening. When you see this extreme output, this wild range from gangster swing all the way to gospel and shannon, what does that suggest about the artist's actual process?
Yeah, how do they manage that?
And are those two massive Verdageous tracks maybe the key? The anchors holding this whole sprawling project together. Thinking about these production choices, well, it helps us understand how these high-output creators actually work, how they balance sheer volume with deep conceptual ideas. Food for thought, anyway.